I am delighted to be able to introduce some of the people behind 1917. Please help me welcome Dean Charles Chapman. George MacKay. Producer Pippa Harris. Composer Thomas Newman. Writer Krysty Wilson-Cairns. Cinematographer Roger Deakins. And the writer, director, and producer of the film, Sam Mendes.
That's a first.
Sam, what came first, the desire to make a movie about World War I or desire to make a movie in this fashion with the one take?
Oh, the desire to make a movie about World War I, I think. It came from my grandfather who fought in the war. He went to the front in 1916 as a 17-year-old. Although he didn't tell the stories for 40 or 50 years, he didn't tell his own children. He did decide, for whatever reason, to tell his grandchildren. We would sit at his feet in his retirement years on his veranda in Trinidad, which is where he was born, and my father was born there too, and tell us these tales. And there was one particular tale about carrying a message. He was given a task of carrying a message. I won't go into details about it, but this particular story stuck with me. And I thought how wonderful it might be to tell a story about one man carrying a message through this vast panorama of destruction that was the Great War. So that's where it came from. But for whatever reason, it sat for years and years, and it's only recently that I had the courage to sit down and write it, because I've never written a screenplay before. But with the knowledge that I'd accrued, or felt I had accrued, over the course of making 7 or 8 other movies, I thought I was about ready to do it, and perhaps do him justice in the process.
Krysty, Sam came up with the idea and the structure for this, and then it was sort of up to you to write the scenes and the dialogue and put a lot of the flesh on the bones. What kind of research did you do in order to do that?
A massive amount of research. I mean, it's not fair to say I wrote it, but it was complete collaboration. But yeah, no, I mean, I went to northern France, I read a lot of first-hand accounts. I tried to immerse myself as much as possible in the world and what it was like for individuals, because the whole point of this was to tell a very, very large story about a massive war with huge death toll, but through, a very small lens, through one man. And so that we needed that research to achieve that.
It seems like a movie like this is all in the prep. I'm curious, Roger, can you talk a little bit about what the preparation was to shoot?
Well, I started with Sam very early on, actually. Just talking sort of concepts, just talking, not style, just talking through the whole script and the idea of it, and gradually, we had a storyboard artist and started sketching out ideas, and then basically it didn't really evolve till we started rehearsals properly with the actors, because you had to work out, the length of travel and all the timing of the dialogue and the action and stuff. So it was really a big collaboration between everybody doing this. So we were standing in an open field in the pouring rain in January, putting stakes in the ground where the trench would be, and then little markers where a certain piece of action would be, and I was running around with a little camera trying to kind of judge what the shot would, and we were looking at it, and it just evolved like that.
George, that you guys were rehearsing for several months before you started. Can you talk a little bit about what those rehearsals were like and how you prepared to play these soldiers?
Yeah, we were all together very early on, and that's a real rarity, you know, in filmmaking, that all departments and especially the actors are there kind of from the very beginning. So it was such a blessing to be around everyone, and it was essential. And so I guess we just went layer by layer, because as Roger was saying, that, you know, the length of the scene dictates the length of the set, and the shape of the set dictates what the camera wants to do, but the camera, you know, but the set will also make room for what the camera wants to do. So it's this complete mutual handoff always in kind of piecing this together, and we just went layer by layer, and and then you kind of learn by osmosis. I mean, I think I could walk the route of the film from memory now, and it's kind of and in having it so in your bones that you can kind of forget about it, it allows you, when you actually come to play the scenes after all of that preparation, to kind of be more free in it.
The sets are remarkable too. Pippa, can you talk at all about how you guys built them, where you built them?
Yeah, well, all across the UK. I mean, obviously the real locations are in northern France and are all protected. You know, a lot of them are museums, memorials now. So it was a question of finding locations in the UK that matched them. And Sam, much to my chagrin, didn't seem to want to find those within 30 miles of London. So, you know, I'd be proffering up bits of field, flat field near Surrey, and he said, no, that's not right at all. And actually, Dennis Gassner was instrumental in, and our location manager Emma Pill, in finding the exact pieces of landscape that fitted what Sam had in his mind, in terms of, for instance, the landscape where the French farmhouse is built, which needed to be sort of massive, and, you know, it needed to allow the boys to walk down through an orchard, past a pool, into the farmhouse, and then come out the other side in order to have an expanse for the plane to come down. So it was actually a massive piece of land. So each different location came with its own problems or challenges.
Dean, what happens if you make a mistake as an actor in the middle of one of these?
You're screwed. No, there was definitely a pressure. You know, you'd be sort of halfway through a take, like Blake's death scene was 9 minutes long, and whether it was like worrying about the blood rig or screwing up a line, or, you know, it would cross the back of your mind if you did do something wrong. But the goal was to just carry on, and you can sort of put it towards theatre. It felt more like a play that was being filmed on camera rather than filming a movie.
One of the things that's remarkable to me about this movie is that you guys just started shooting it in April. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Thomas, when did you start working on the score? How quickly were you getting footage that you could work from?
Maybe as early as like May. Sam started sending me bits of footage, or extended like 10-minute sequences, and I would start sketching and sending things off to Lee Smith, the editor, and I don't know how much Sam heard. Eventually he started hearing more as he got into post and could focus more on that.
So were you kind of shooting and in post concurrently in some sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a whole section of the process that was, which is editing really. You normally would have 8 to 10 weeks, and that had to happen while we were shooting, because, you know, the one thing you can normally impose in post is rhythm, but we had to judge, or I had to judge rhythm as we were shooting it, and so rehearsals were hugely important, obviously, but there was an unsung hero in all of this. I mean, you would think that an editor on a movie with no edits would be a relatively useless figure. In fact, he was incredibly important, because Lee was putting the movie together, stitching it together, and adding sound and a temp score or some of Tom's temp music and sending it back to me, so that literally the day after we shot it, we could see the movie up to that point, because we were shooting in sequence. So, you know, we would shoot a scene, and Lee would put it into the movie, and the next day we'd watch I could watch the first 25 minutes of the film, or the first 30 minutes, or the first 40. And that way I was able to make those judgment calls about rhythm and pace that you would normally make in the cut. because I wanted the movie to breathe in and breathe out, and not just be a headlong charge, you know. In the same way as Roger and I wanted the camera to both be very intimate at times and also observe these tiny figures in a huge landscape at other times without edits. In the same way, you want it to go through periods of silence. You know, some of the moments I think I'm proudest of in the film are the moments where it's not, you know, there's no action hardly at all. I mean, the sequence in the woods with the singing soldier, for example. You know, to have the courage on the day, knowing that you can't cut out of that scene, knowing there's no way out of any scene, to take the time it took for him to walk up the bank, walk through that woods in his own time, barely able to walk, and the song get closer and closer, and then still have the courage, for us I'm talking about, to leave Schofield behind and go in amongst those soldiers as they wait for what they probably assume is going to be death in the last few minutes before they have to stand up and go down to that new line. You know, I was able to have that courage because I'd seen the movie up to that point. So Lee was feeding us back the movie, but that meant that by the time we wrapped, we had a first cut, you know, literally the day we wrapped. And I actually sat with these guys, most of them down, apart from George and Dean, who were exhausted, to watch the movie about 3 days after we finished. And say, right, this is what we got, you know. But then Tom, sparing his blushes, added a whole other dimension, because whatever temp score you can put on a movie, it's not the score that's been written and tailored for the film itself. And Tom, I think, has done something extraordinary with this. And, you know, although you can't adjust rhythm and pace in editing terms, with music you can. Music can give you momentum, can give you power, can give you rhythm or a sense of a ticking clock, where perhaps you're not able to do that editorially. So that became a very crucial part of the process.
Roger, the vast majority of this movie is outside. How did you approach lighting? Is this mostly natural lighting, or obviously there are some effects at night?
Well, I mean, the daylight obviously is daylight. No, there's no way you could light it. I wouldn't want to anyway. I don't tend to use a lot of light in exteriors, whatever film I'm doing. But it is particularly for the mood of the film, and just logistically, we had to shoot in cloud, and that was the biggest, I thought, the biggest shot in the dark we made, actually, because even though it's England, you can't really rely on cloud all the time. But then, so that was the day exteriors, but then there were also the night stuff on the interiors, so there was some, you know, actually quite complex lighting. I mean, the lighting for the acoust, you know, the bombed out town was probably the biggest single lighting rig I've ever done on a film. That was pretty much a challenge, so yeah, it was fun.
And because this is, because you're using this entire set, where is Video Village? Where are you? How are you communicating with your actors?
That's a very good question. Pippa, where were you all that time?
Well, I didn't have a kebab van, which is what Roger had. I was in a horse box next to Sam's horse box. But yeah, we were. I mean, most of the time actually we were sort of parked out of the way, but there were a couple of times where we couldn't get Video Village right out of the way, and it had to get painted out in post. But most of the time we sort of were behind trees or hidden away somewhere. But Roger was quite far away from his own focus puller a lot of the time, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge was the transmission, because it was not only the Video Village, but it was my wheels operating the remote head. It was Andy Harris, my assistant, focus pulling. We were all a long way away from the action, you know, and we had to communicate as well. My wife James was talking all the time to the operators or the grips as they were carrying the camera. So it was, we all had to be in full communication, and sometimes they're at the bottom of a 7-foot trench, a quarter of a mile away. So that was big technical challenge.
What was that like for you guys as the actors? Did you feel like you were sort of separate? Were you able to communicate when you needed to?
It was great, because it makes it all the more real, really. You know, because once the scene gets going, you don't want to be communicating to the guys off camera. So like, it was really helpful, you know, that we became more and more in our own world as we went. So yeah, if anything, it just made it feel more real.
I mean, sometimes I couldn't say cut because they couldn't hear me because they were miles away. But a good example of something of how odd this was and unusual as a movie is, the scene where shortly after Blake dies, Mark Strong's character, Captain Smith, meets Schofield and takes him, and suddenly you reveal that there are those trucks that have arrived, and they walk along the line of trucks. And there's a colonel in the middle of that ordering the men to move the tree. Do you remember that? And so his experience, a very fine actor, he agreed to be in it because I persuaded him. But he has a few lines, and his experience of that scene would have been 3 minutes before he had his line. Way in the distance, he'd hear action like that, and then eventually, after about 2 minutes, there's an AD in the back seat of that car who goes, "Ow," and then he does his scene. Okay, with out comes George and Mark, and they do their scene, and then they carry on past him, and they go on for another 3 minutes, and then way in the distance, like that. Okay, so, and after 5 takes of this, I had this very forlorn voice, as Bill in the front seat, the colonel, Sam. I was like, yeah, I trotted over to him, which is a long way, as Pippa says, from my, I was like, yeah. He goes, "Where's the camera?" And he didn't know where the camera was. I mean, he couldn't there was no visible evidence that there was a film crew. It was like he was being punked or something. He was like, what's going on? Is this a reenactment? Or, and I had to say, "It's just behind you," but only for about 30 seconds, and then it moves on. You went, "Okay." And that was it, and right at the end of the day, he said, "Well, that was one of the strangest, most enjoyable days I've ever spent on a movie." But it was quite. Sometimes it was like a piece of performance art in the middle of a field, and there was no real evidence because you couldn't see. That's why your question is a very good one. You couldn't see where the crew were. There was a camera operator and a boom operator, but that was it. We were all over the next, hill.
George, what was it like shooting the scene in the rapids?
In the rapids, it was intense.
It was cold.
It was, yeah.
He was a hero for getting in that river, man.
It was, it was nippy. Like it was. It was. I mean, it was really. I mean, how much can we sort of give away of the sort of the secrets as to sort of the location, I guess, or is it best sort of?
It's all in the press pack.
You're on your own, George. Can't guide you now.
Yeah. No, well, we went to. It was at a whitewater rafting facility, some of it, and so it was even the flow of the water could be plotted basically, and so you would drain this facility, and then they could put rocks in so that would affect the flow of the water, and we did many tests as to how to get that footage as well, like in terms of whether the camera could be in the water with me, but then by the same token, if my body's under the water, I move differently to the being that's on top of the water, and so then it was Roger and his team who came along and said actually it should be a vehicle at the side with the crane hanging over. So it was just, I mean, it was an amazing sort of technical feat, and then in the terms of the doing of it and the feeling of it, I mean, there's not too much sort of acting needed in terms of you just trying to stay up.
Sam, we're in an era where there's a lot of concern about the theatrical experience and whether people will still go out to movie theaters. Did you, as you were thinking of this movie, how did you think about how the theatrical experience would play into it?
Well, I think, when you're making a movie on this scale, you're hoping as many people as possible are going to see it in a cinema. It's not just the way it's shot, it's the way the sound is orchestrated, the way the music is orchestrated. It's a immersive, I hope, as immersive experience as I could have created. The important point about the film is, one can talk a lot about the how, but it's the why of the film that I think is the most important. You want people to confront the fact that this many men and civilians sacrificed their lives in the Great War, and to not forget that. And at a time when we are, you can forget that these men were fighting for a free and unified Europe, which we now have, and that has been under debate and discussion. So that also features too in one's thinking about why that period of time remains important. And for us as a culture, I think, particularly in the UK, I think, you know, in the US, I think the Second World War obviously looms very, very large, but because the US presence in the First World War was less, it doesn't in the same way. Whereas for us in the UK, I think it is a mythic, vast shadow that's cast across history. And if you walk through any towns and villages in any part of England, the memorials to the fallen and the poppies that are worn on Remembrance Day remain as strong now as they were when I was a child. It's a very, very powerful, potent war in our society. And there's a reason for that, which is that a whole generation of men were lost. And I wanted to, in some way, make that feel contemporary, for us to understand that, for it not to be dry and dusty, for it not to be a history lesson, for it not to be kind of eat your peas, you know, for it not to be a slog through the mud, but a journey, you know, towards some, without wanting to sound pretentious, human truth. Why do you make war movies? Well, because in war, human beings are tested to the absolute ultimate of what you know, what it is that to be human, what it is to leave your country and never come back, what it is to what home means, what friendship means. These are you know, larger themes that the movie is struggling to, and I hope trying to deal with in some articulate way, and it's trying to do that non-verbally often. You know, one of the things I admire most about George's performance is the last 50 minutes of the movie is barely any dialogue at all, but it's a very wonderful performance, physically, emotionally, spiritually. He communicates with every fibre of his being, and it's very easy to overlook how difficult that is. And I admire that performance hugely. But that's why we're doing it. The technique, the style is in service of something else, to try to put you in that place. And of course, the best way to do that is in a situation like being in this theatre. You know, we've created these wonderful palaces for ourselves. Why would we not use them?
That seems like a great place to end it. Thank you all so much.